But I want to start with what's behind the Republican Party's war against democracy. What got me thinking about this, Louise and I just finished watching the Netflix series. It's a short one. It's I believe it's 6 segments, as I recall, maybe 7. I'm pretty sure it's 6. It's called Transatlantic. And it takes place in November of 1940 in Marseille, France. It's a fiction, but it's fictionalized history. It involves a group of Jewish refugees from Germany who have made their way to France, to Marseille, which is a port city. They're trying to get on a boat to get the hell out of France, and many of them wanting to get to America. And the Nazis have seized most of France. They have not yet seized Marseille. They seized Marseille in the middle of this series. I don't think I'm doing spoilers here. It's really a gripping, dramatic series. I mean, if you love, just can't put it down. In fact, one day last week, I think it was Thursday, maybe Friday, I was kind of goofy in the morning. It was because Louise and I had stayed up until 11 o'clock. We couldn't stop watching this thing. Normally we go to bed at 9, or go to sleep at 9, go to bed at 8. So, because we get up so early to do this show. So anyhow, we were watching this show, and it includes, I think I mentioned it includes people like Hannah Arendt and Marc Chagall, real people who were really there in Marseille, really trying to get out. And the guy who was getting them out, he's a real historical figure too. The whole Wikipedia page for him on him and everything else. And it got me thinking. Well, it got both of us thinking. In fact, we had a long conversation about it, about how Germany, I mean, we lived in Germany for a year, and I knew Nazis. I mean, I knew people, my mentor was an officer in Hitler's army. He had, completely disavowed them. His spiritual mentor after the war was a Hasidic Jew, in fact. Herr Mueller had been drafted into the army, as were a number of other people that I worked with. Most of them had been Hitler Youth. And what we learned when we lived there was that it was the social issues that enabled Hitler to take over Germany. The argument that, gay people, socialists, Jews, gypsies were corrupting German society. The Hitler takeover was really based on social issues. And when he took over the country, what did he do? He changed the curriculum in the schools to downplay Germany's atrocities in World War I. He changed the laws to make it much harder to vote, particularly in towns and communities that had large Jewish populations. Keep in mind there were 5 million Jews living in Germany at the time. There were some towns that were more than half Jewish. And he just went after a minority group, several minority groups, Jews, gays, and socialists. I don't know if you could call them a minority group, but it was very quick, relatively speaking. I mean, it took about 5 years before it was. Well, it took about a year before you couldn't resist anymore. And how did this happen? Well, it turns out that there was this guy who was a media mogul. Hitler was arrested in 1923, as I recall. Maybe it was 22, after the beer hall push in Munich. And he was banned after he got out of prison. He was banned from public speaking. So he just went quiet. And in 1930, this guy named Alfred Hugenberg, he was the Rupert Murdoch of Germany. He owned two of the largest newspapers in Germany. He owned radio stations. He was a media mogul. And he brought in Hitler. And he cut a deal with Hitler to promote him across Germany, this media guy. And that's how Hitler rose to prominence between 1930 and 1933. And it was on social issues, almost entirely. That, they'd been stabbed in the back at the Treaty of Versailles by the Jews and the homosexuals and the socialists who were part of the negotiations. And there were Jews, and there was a gay man, and there were, socialists who were part of those negotiations. And then after Hugenberg got Hitler famous across Germany, because he had just been famous largely in Bavaria, got him famous all across Germany, then Fritz Thyssen, this, billionaire in today's dollars, a German industrialist, the head of Krupp Steelworks, as I recall, went to the Association of German Industrialists, which is the equivalent of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and got them to donate 3 million marks to the Nazi Party, which would be, hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money for the 1932 election. And, after that election, Hitler ended up with, the Nazis only got about a third of the vote. But Hindenburg, who was politically independent, he thought he could control Hitler. And, he was in with Tyson. Hey, and Tyson's interest was having tax cuts for the very rich and more government contracts for his steel company. That's what he was all about. Are you starting to see parallels here? Tyson later wrote a book called I Paid Hitler. I have a copy of it. And it's just so sad to read this guy apologizing for having basically put Hitler into power. So I just wanted to lay this out for you. I mean, we're seeing the exact same scenario being played out, or not exact, but a very similar scenario being played out right now in the United States. And it's extraordinarily troubling. And once you have said, as a political party, once you've taken the position that, you hate Jews and blacks, it's awful hard to go back and say, oh, no, they're not such bad people.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Gays and lesbians and trans people. You can't just say, oh, yeah, we were trashing them for years for political. This is going to have to end.